So a couple of weeks ago, I went to Esalen, and it was the first time I'd been in a while where I didn't really have very much to do. I didn't have to do anything. So I was there supporting my wife and helping her set up her workshop. And then they were having a conference there. They have these invite-only conferences called the Center for Theory and Research. And it was set up by Michael Murphy, whose family owns the property, a long time ago. And the main thing that they initially focused on was like evidence for life after death. And so it's kind of like a invite-only group of like researchers who historically have mostly kind of been on the sort of paranormal, parapsychology edge. But over the last decade and a half, it's kind of transformed as other people have come to take on the programming. And so now it has more like humanities scholars, and there's sort of a wider range of topics like, or I think last year they had one on like African-American esotericism. So it was all about like the esoteric in that zone. And so some of the stuff is actually more close to my own studies and a lot of the people who are involved. And they were doing a week on the subtle body, which was something they hadn't really looked at too much. And it's a very interesting topic. And even though I didn't have to give a paper, so it was nice because I wasn't working, they let me stick around for a few days. So I got to meet some of the folks, and some of them I already knew, and kind of see what people were saying. And it's a really, really interesting topic because, how to say it, there's a lot of different things to say about it. Now, one thing is that I realized that I didn't even really know this, is that at least in the, well, I'll take a step back. One of the first places we hear about the subtle body in like Western esotericism is in Theosophy. And Theosophy was sort of taking in a lot of Indian and tantric ideas and kind of organizing them differently, shaping them differently. But, it definitely connected in some organic ways with Tantra and other Hindu streams. And they came up with this, they put forward this idea that again has Indian roots, although there's different models of like the 7 sheets of the body. So you have like the physical body, and I don't even remember how they all go, the nervous system, and then you have like the astral body and the causal body and all these different kind of bodies that are kind of literally sheets. And if you think about it in an esoteric way, it kind of makes sense because, well, obviously we have physical bodies, even if we're inside of an illusory matrix, there's something like these physical bodies. And if there's some kind of spiritual essence, it's very, abstract or doesn't have obvious qualities in most models. But between these two, what connects them? Like, do we just have this little abstract spark in the midst of a physical meat machine? And that's sort of a dissatisfying solution. And it also doesn't really support or encourage the wide range of spiritual practices, body-mind practices, that seem to generate energies, experiences, patterns, healings in a realm that's sort of between these two. So you can think about the subtle body or the energy body or even the astral body, if you want, as sort of being between the kind of higher whatever it is of spirit and the physical form and the nervous system. And I always thought of the subtle body as kind of more like an energy body that sort of takes the shape of your physical form. It's got arms and legs, and it's just made of a different kind of stuff. And they were saying, no. In Hindu Tantra, the subtle body is actually not extended. It's this very subtle kind of unit that is the thing that transmigrates. So when you die, it's the subtle body that kind of cruises along. Of course, Buddhism has a different account of it because it doesn't like the idea that we have an essence or a soul, but it still has to explain how transmigration or reincarnation works. And that's another story. But nonetheless, the basic idea of a subtle body or an energy body is really, really interesting to me in terms of Dharmanaut stuff, because even when I'm wearing my naturalist hat, and I'm pretty much like, yes, we are evolved animals inside of space-time, on a material world, dealing with matter, energy, and consciousness, which isn't necessarily that mystical. And even when I'm in that frame, I still have to say, yeah, but there's something like an energy body. There's something like energy that you can feel inside of meditation, inside of doing yoga or doing Tai Chi practice. And you can think about it in kind of an amorphous way. Well, I just felt these energy opening up, or I felt bliss. But you can get really technical with it, and you start going like, well, what is a chakra? Let's see what it feels like to like imagine that there's a chakra at the root of my spine, and you really work on it, you know, week in and week out for a while, and something's going to start to happen. And that might be that awareness is blooming. It might be that you're partly constructing this thing according to a map, and maybe something in between. And obviously there's all these healing systems, acupuncture and the meridian lines that they seem to work on, that are, you know, definitely embedded in an older way of thinking about the body and the relationship between elements and planets and organs and how they're distributed through the body, and this kind of network that can literally be sort of like pinged and resonated through the pins of the acupuncture needles. And if you look at it on paper, you go, this is just esotericism. This is just some wild fantasizing. And yet when you enter into these systems in a kind of open-ended, pragmatic, let's see where it goes way, particularly if you have healing needs and things happen and things heal, it's hard to just be like, oh, it's all just in our minds. But it's got this weird kind of liminal ontology, the energy body, sort of like it's there and it's not there. It's something we invent, but it's sort of already there. It kind of, there's universal patterns in it, but it's also clearly like a cultural construct. And when you add in the question of psychedelic experience, it's even more far out, because a lot of people report and have experiences of very embodied transmutations of energy, patterns, recognizing places where there's blocks, seeing lines of light, having energies come off their palms, feeling even like they can move energy in other people's bodies, which is an experience that I've had many times, even though I haven't studied energy healing and don't really think of myself as an energy healer. So there's something about this weird realm of the energy body. Like I'll use that instead of subtle body just for shits and giggles. But there's something about it that in its very liminality, it's there and it's not there, points towards something about the nature of psychedelic consciousness and psychedelic reality, the way that it's there and it's not there. You know, one way of thinking about it is like, well, if you let's say, just taking the Hindu example, if you go back and you look at the history of, let's say, the chakra system, you know, all of us, like, how many chakras are there, everybody? 7, right? There's 7 chakras, right? Okay. Well, you go back and you look and you go, wow, in the subsystems, there's not 7, there's 14. And there's a bunch of little ones that go like this way, or in Tibetan Tantra, there's 5. And you're like, okay, what is that? Is it that there really are X number of chakras, the way that there are organs in our body, and that some people just kind of lump them together and split them apart? Or is it more that there are certain predilections in our experience that lend themselves to being organized in certain ways, and different cultures will organize them, or even within one culture will organize them differently? And then part of what happens is that you, as a practitioner, encounter these traditions or a teacher or a set of practices, and you start doing them, And as you're doing them, you're kind of like wiring or potentiating or not potentiating, you're crystallizing your potential energy body in a certain form because of the practices you're doing and the ideas you have and the teachings that you're getting. But it's not that it's just our imagination. It's that there is this kind of potential body that's getting organized in one way versus another. And so we can see commonalities, but also really significant differences within traditions and between traditions. So that's a really kind of interesting thing to sit with as a practitioner. And you know, when I reflect on what we've been doing in the Dharmanaut circle and in the psychedelic Sangha before that, in terms of the meditations, most of the meditations or a lot of the meditations have really been kind of in this energy direction, which was not necessarily something that I set out to do, but just seemed to naturally go along with the themes that we were dealing with, and also the particular question of how do you integrate something like dharmic or spiritual practice with psychedelic experience? And it remains an open question. I don't think it's the most important question. I don't think it's probably the most important question for everybody here, but it's a very interesting one and an important one. And I have some other thoughts about that maybe we can get to later, but I want to stay with the energy body. But one thing that it seems very clear is that your own sensitivity and understanding and familiarity with your own energy body, let's call it, the way your body feels from the inside as a kind of network of flows and forces and intensities, in addition to the more obvious energies of breath or of pain or of tension. You know, these words are all words that we can accept in a fully physical paradigm, whereas the energy you feel in a yoga practice is not necessarily doesn't necessarily register on a machine. So there's something kind of elusive about it, and yet in some ways it's really not that different. Like my experience of subtle energy or energy flows in my body in some ways aren't really that different than my experience of the breath or my experience of tension, but they are on this kind of weird continuum. And so part of what we can do is, by paying particularly close attention to our bodies and being very open and willing to work with whatever's coming up, including pain, including tension, including, you know, skeletal issues, you know, how I'm holding things. Oh, wait, am I really relaxed? Am I not relaxed? Even if we're doing that and paying attention to the physical body, you're developing an interior proprioception, some kind of interior way of sensing that will also open up into subtler and subtler experiences. And these subtler and subtler experiences will become available in meditation, particularly when you're going for it, or, you know, you're working the energy field. And I believe they also become more and more available in psychedelic experience, definitely cannabis experience, and also just sensation in general, so that your sensation in the world, going about the day, feeling the breeze on your skin, smelling the coffee, all of these sort of ordinary experiences have the potential to get sort of, I don't want to say use language, you know, in a sort of kind of cliched way, but it allows them to become subtle in their own senses, so that even gross experiences of the senses have a quality of subtlety, a kind of invitation, a kind of poetics in them. You know, the same, very much the way that reading a beautiful poem that's just about nature, like nothing abstract, nothing about history, just like a beautiful poem about the moon reflecting on the lake and the quality of the wind through the trees and the coldness of the air. And there's something about it, like you're reading it, and something strikes you in your soul, something you can't quite name, that has a kind of haunting quality, or it's like a memory you can't put your finger on. You know, that subtle quality of sensation and relation, particularly with sensation and nature, those are all elements that you can cultivate so that your ordinary day is filled with moments of this kind of ordinary sublime that I think has a lot to do with the development of this sort of energetic capacity. I don't think it's necessary for it, but it's almost like taking that same spirit inside, so that your experience of your own body in meditation, not just the physical body, but also the sort of energetic body, where you have a sense of spaciousness and dimension and dynamics and flows and intensities, that those experiences too can become kind of, if you will, poetic, so that there's sort of an aesthetic dimension of them that makes them pleasant and interesting and sometimes difficult in themselves, but also offers like kind of a subtler gateway, subtler portals to internal experience that moves us away from strict identification with the patterns of perception and the patterns of sensation that we kind of get generically, just kind of growing up in our society with the ways that it already organizes the body. So that was some of the stuff that people were talking about, and it was really very interesting. And there were some people there at this conference that really wanted the subtle body, the energy body, to be real. So that, and there were even some people there who were like I think they actually helped put up the money for to get some of the people there, and they wanted to make it real so they could create a device and scale it up and do that whole thing. And you're like, okay, maybe, but I kind of think it's like that's the whole point, is that you can't quite put your finger on it that way. And so some people there were very into defending the kind of parapsychology science of these energetic fluctuations, and other people were more kind of like me, like kind of humanities oriented, where it's sort of like liminal and tricksy and kind of there and not there. So it was a very interesting kind of exploration. And I want to emphasize that I don't think this is what meditation all is, and that a lot of what I do on my own doesn't necessarily go in these directions that much anymore, or I'll spend a little bit of time at the beginning of a meditation doing it, or if I'm stuck with something, I'll kind of go and work this stuff. But in terms of psychoactive experience, and even just the psychoactivity of sensation, this has really been a powerful zone. And I think it's really important to get comfortable with your energy body and get it comfortable with, even if you don't like that term, it sounds too new age or something, just getting comfortable with the way your body feels internally, including the subtleties of it. Even subtle physical things within it, breathing especially, is really helpful to supporting subtler and more, let's call them abstract dimensions of waking up, or of mind, or of non-cognitive experience, or non-discursive experience, the different ways of talking about the kind of awake awareness that can be part of meditation. So I think it's really a wonderful thing to practice with. I keep thinking about, I probably mentioned it here before, when I took a yoga class. It was pretty early on when I was taking it seriously, within the first 6 months. And I came out of Ustrasana, the camel pose, in which you're like leading, it's a back bend, so you're really opening your chest, and and then I came out of it like this, whoosh, and I just, it was like totally psychedelic, and it was like, whoa, man, and I was like, okay, blah, blah, blah. And I went up to and just partly for fun, I went up to the teacher afterwards, and I said, yeah, man, I came out of Ustrasana, all this stuff happened, da 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 da, and he goes, Well, your blood flow, this, you got to be careful because sometimes, you can pass out because of the flow of the blood. And I went, no, 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 dude, I know what that feels like. This was like nitrous oxide. And he went, oh, well, there's this energy realm. And then he switched languages into like yoga, tantra, mystic speak. And it was just so marvelous because he did it without any sense of like conflict. And it really, to me, was a great affirmation of the kind of pragmatism of the way that I like to work and the way that I've come to think about these things. It's like, totally, I'm up for all the embodied explanations, all the biophysical descriptions, thinking about evolution, thinking about how we experience the world in terms of evolution and genetics and all that kind of thing. And then just when you get to the weird stuff, you go, yeah, okay, there are other ways of doing that. And let's use those and work within them and not feel that there's necessarily really a conflict or that there's less of a conflict than a lot of people want to make out that there is. I mean, I suspect preaching to the choir here on that particular point, but I think it's one of the nice things about working with the energy body and with the kind of subtle sensation is that it sort of almost moves between those two levels of explanation. So that if you have like, here's the biophysical account, and here's the sort of esoteric occult physiology account, there's something in between those two. Like it's a further in between point, and it takes the form of subtle sensation or subtle perception, where even it is kind of suspended. You don't even know which category you're in anymore. And to me, that's a really deep thing about psychedelics, the way that psychedelics are. They're material objects, they're being metabolized in your body. However weird and multidimensional your experience is, it almost always predictably declines at the same time that it should be declining. Because at the end of the day, your body is metabolizing some material compounds that come from nature or come from a lab. And that kind of demand or dimension of the material, I think has like a deeper message for us. It's not just about, oh, drugs can do certain things to you. It's that the whole realm of materiality has this doubled quality to it, as if every tone has an overtone, or there's a harmonic to all of these materials, even like that's sort of a new age image of overtones and harmonics, that those things point towards a sort of doubleness in experience that we take on board in meditation and in practices like yoga or in energy work, where you're kind of working the two at the same time and sort of lining them up and allowing them to resonate. So tonight for the meditation, I want to focus in on working with the Dantian, which is the energy center that I spent the most time kind of working. And if any of you have done martial arts, you have undoubtedly encountered the Dantian, or in Japanese, the Hara, because in martial arts, it's kind of it's often cast as the sort of origin of all motion. So even if you're like, even if you're hitting someone farther all the way out here, you're generating that whole gesture from your belly, from the pit of the belly. And then there's a whole esoteric physiology that spills out of this as well. And there's lots of dimensions to it, some of which I only know a little bit about. So I'm definitely not an expert in this stuff. And I know that, and there definitely are people who are, have quite a lot. There was a guy there at the conference, Simon Cox, and he wrote a book called The Subtle Body, A Genealogy. It's a new book, Oxford University Press. It's terribly overpriced. He admits it. So go ahead, go to LibGenRS, download his book. Don't give him a dime. He's fine with it. It's a very, very interesting overview of this story, sort of from Eastern models and how they entered theosophy and into Aleister Crowley and the occult, and kind of came up to the new age, talking about this sort of mutating energy body. But the dude himself is like super kung fu master. He like lived for 5 years in China, like doing rigorous Taoist martial arts every day for like literally 5 years. So he's like super intense. And he was talking to me about what the internal Taoist practices were like, and there, so there was some general information that I encountered before, but it reminded me of just how seriously people can work this stuff. I mean, he basically said that his only meditation instruction for 3 years was to go over there, sit for a few hours, and focus on the Dantian. That was it. Nothing. And then after 3 years of that, I came back and go, well, okay, you can work out, you can start doing this with it and start moving the energy around, because ultimately you start moving the energy through your body. And some of that energy that you're developing has to do with bliss, with developing a sense of yumminess that comes through both the focus on that particular area of, let's call it the subtle body, the energy body, but also is a feature of concentration. So when you're working with the Dantian, you're partly working with the energetics of your body and working with a particular region, but it's also a concentration practice, meaning you're also developing the capacity to stay with it and not to have your mind wander, to keep returning until there's kind of a steadiness to the meditation object, even a kind of trance that's opening up. And you'll read, there's different accounts of bliss and how it happens. If you're working with the Buddhist jhanas, the first stage has a lot of bliss functioning, but they don't really locate it in a particular part of your body. Whereas in this Taoist stuff, you're developing what they call Jing, which is this kind of bliss energy that then can be circulated and move through the body. I'm not working a particular system. I'm not capable of working a particular system, but I do have a few thoughts on generating bliss and by that, I don't mean like necessarily complete ecstasy. There's obviously like gradations, but I think it's an important part of practice, and it definitely can also rear its head in a wonderful way in psychoactive experience. But I think it's a-okay to let yourself go, well, part of what I'm doing in my meditation today or right now is I'm kind of seeing if I can stir up some of that bliss, some of those bliss embers. Don't feel like, oh man, I'm just going for the pleasure. It's like, go for the pleasure, because the more pleasurable meditation is, the more you'll do it. And the pleasure itself has a kind of transformative power. It's almost like a fire. So as you develop like bliss, it's like you're building a fire, and that fire can metaphorically melt things. It can clean things. It can transform things. So it's part of a larger kind of ecology. And the one sort of hint that I will give you, and I invite you as we go for the next half an hour to sort of, I might not, I'll bring it up on occasion to remember it, but feel free to just have it in your mind, your intentions as well, is just that my sense of it is that it can be very subtle at first, almost to the point where you don't think anything's happening on the level of like this kind of bliss, but it's actually there. It's actually kind of right next to it's almost like it's always already there, and you have to kind of wake up to what's there rather than you're creating it. And you're like, well, it's not working. It's actually like, well, there's a way of reframing your fundamental real-time sense of the phenomenological unfolding of your body mind. Right there, there's just a way of shifting it such that your ordinary sense of feeling alive in your body is actually bliss. It's already, wow, But we don't think about it that way because we have too much else going on. And so it's kind of right there in a way. So I'm just going to throw that out there. We'll let it come up during the time. So yeah, let's start the sit. So if you want to turn off the pictures, and I know some of you out there lie down, but for this one, please sit up because it really is about what's happening in your spine and at the root of your spine. So find a comfortable seat and allow yourself to settle into a posture that's going to let you really both feel relaxed and feel upright, so that there is a clarity and a craft to your spine and your sense of sitting, but also a way to relax. And I usually go through all the specific points, but I'm just going to give you that request, that invitation. And what I want to first concentrate on is the process of relaxation and bringing a little bit more attention to it. You all know what it's like to relax, and as we settle in, we're going to be relaxing, letting tension go, and make your first moves. Maybe you exhale more deeply and use the exhale as a way of relaxing, or you settle your shoulders, even moving a little bit to let that tension go. So just do the first things you normally do when you settle down in meditation. Probably your breath slows down, opens up, more deep diaphragm breathing. Maybe you notice your jaws clenching. But as you go through your body, whether you're scanning or just allowing tensions to arise and then relax, see if you can notice the feeling of contraction before you release the tension. Really recognize what that feels like, what that tastes like as you relax. Do let yourself scan or allow your attention to fall at different parts throughout your body, because as we all know, I might have an idea that my left leg is relaxed, but then I notice that I'm holding some real tension there, some contraction that disguised itself as relaxation. And in recognizing that, it allows itself to release. So take a few moments here to really kind of go through your body and acknowledge these contractions, especially these subtler, kind of hidden ones, and invite them to let go. They might not, which is fine. Don't force it, although you can always sort of add the breath in as part of the invitation. But let's just do that for a few minutes. as you scan for contraction, you might notice that they're subtler and subtler. Perhaps they are less immediately located in a particular physical part of your body. Even if it's sort of in my leg, it doesn't really feel like it's sort of part, but like a muscular contraction. It's almost something else, or not. But what I'm asking you to do is to tune into subtler and subtler forms of contraction. And if you're doing that in an expansive, exploratory way, sooner or later, you will encounter contractions that aren't going anywhere. And that's totally fine. But see if you can find those core contractions. This is contractions like, I have a body, or I'm a self, or this is what it feels like to be alive. So just play with that. See if you can move into subtler and subtler contractions, inviting them to release and accepting them if they don't. If you've reached your end, you can always ride the breath and pay particular attention to the bottom of the exhale. Ideally, your breath is deep. Your diaphragm is sinking as you inhale, and you become more and more aware of that process, almost like a bellows, and really riding that end as you exhale and release. And in a way, that's the moment to see the contraction that's still there. In that moment of release and full relaxation at the end of the breath, there's still something, there's still a pattern. You might call it energy. Like a live wire, or like your body is plugged into the electricity network and there's sort of a buzz running through it, a kind of holding, energetic signature. I think in sitting, we often feel that we're supposed to just relax. But there are certain forms of holding, call it contraction, that are instrumental to the overall pose. There are subtle muscles that are keeping your spine upright, that are tilting your head in precisely the form that allows you otherwise to relax. We're going to play with another possible contraction. So as you draw more and more of your attention to the diaphragm and to the middle part of your body, or the lower part of your body, sink your attention through your lower belly, down past the sexual organs, and down to the perineum. This is the area between the anus and your external sex organs. And what I want you to do at first is to clench or contract that muscle as if you're holding yourself back from urinating. So do it intensely, like strongly. So you really know it, okay, that sense. And then release. Really release, like give it a few moments to really relax. Open up. No problems. No panic. And maybe one more time, let's do it. Contract it fairly hard. Familiarize yourself with what that feels and then relax again. You notice that it might take a few moments to really relax. There's like an unfolding. It's like, okay, I can trust the situation. I can let go. Now what you want to do is to slightly contract that muscle. Bring it up one notch. As small a notch as you can make, but it's a notch. A slight hold. And then while holding that, allow as much as possible around that slight contraction to otherwise relax. You may need to return to this, or it might feel awkward, but over time, it will become invisible, the way in which the subtle muscles holding up your spine are more or less invisible. So continue breathing into the belly center. And notice the way that there's a kind of very subtle pressure between this hold in the perineum and the exhale of the breath. Almost like the breath is being squeezed from both ends, subtly. Again, you can intensify this feeling just to see what it's like by pushing a little bit down as you exhale. You might add a little bit of ujjayi breathing or that sound in your throat as you do so. Again, think bellows. If you've ever used a bellows, there's some pressure there. It's not completely flaccid. But you want to make it subtle. So it's okay to sort of push it a little farther to get a sense of what the push is like. And then once you've connected with that, try to make everything as gentle as possible while still bringing that attention together. Now, using your imagination, begin to feel as if you are breathing in and out through an aperture an inch or two below your belly button. So it's as if this is the only part of your body that's really breathing. So there are a number of subtle things you're doing here. You're holding your perineum up just a notch. You're adding some slight pressure down at the end of the exhale in particular, but in general, cultivating a sense of a kind of vessel or bellows in the lower belly, and you're breathing in and out of that area. And in a way that's kind of complicated, but it also can become a very beautiful object of concentration. So now I'm going to shut up for a little while and really just try to allow that to be your meditation object with all of its subtleties, and allow yourself to feel any energetic shifts and go with them and make the energetic shift your object. Any sensations, feelings, energies, vibrations, hums, or pleasures, and let those guide your focus. You can play with gently elongating the exhale. Sometimes allows the whole process to flower. So again, you are doing a little bit of intervention. It's okay. You're not just letting the breath do whatever it wants. You're shaping, working it. Subtilizing. Now allow your mind to be a bit of a probe, and you're looking for a spot, again, about 2 inches below your belly button and an inch or so inside. And you can imagine a pebble or point, if it helps, a small glowering flame. And if you can't find it, no big deal. But sort of draw your awareness and attention into that spot. If it helps, you can imagine it glowing red, maybe even pulsing along with the bellows of the breath, like a coal. Inside energy practices, there's all sorts of stuff you can do. Some things very technical, but now I just invite you to allow the energy of this point, this red coal, to rise up like a flame from an ember. And let that flame rise up the central part of your body. And just sort of see, does this work? Does it feel real? Don't worry about it. Just, is it my imagination? Can I feel it with sensation? Doesn't really matter. You're kind of playing. But there's an intention to raise the energy and ultimately allow it to illuminate or touch the heart. You can even imagine in a way that you are sort of sucking the energy up. The slight contraction, but beneath the center, pulling it up. Regardless, allow your attention to settle on the heart, an illumined heart, heart charged with the fire from below. And just rest. Maybe slightly open your eyes, take in the room around you, and feel the clarity and luminous quality of this subtle fire in the heart. let go of all doing, just rest in that luminous clarity. Release any stress. If you're holding locks and moves below, just let them be, or relax if it feels better.